Good afternoon. So we don't have a lot of updates today. We just got it approved through council last week, so this will be fairly brief. So a couple things I'd like to go over is that we do have the contract. I believe it's signed. I think we're waiting on the insurance documents to come back from the Gateway signage. The Gateway bids, originally we budgeted about 500,000. They actually came in under budget. So we're probably going to get a few more signs than we thought we were going to get to begin with. It just depends on the selection process of those signs. We do have 3 signs selected. Of course, one of them is going to be a master sign. Then we'll have a secondary sign, and then we'll have a one that we can print out of our sign shop just to post around town that says, entering city limits.
Just so I know, where are the actual locations?
So I was going to pass that out. We have
Okay,
no
great.
locations yet picked out. We did years ago identify 18 locations that you could potentially put signs at.
I want them all in District 4.
Well, for me, the priority was definitely the highway like the highway signs, but.
So as we go through this process, what we'd like to do is sit down and go through those signs and see where we want a primary sign versus a secondary sign. And maybe there's an additional location somewhere where we're missing something at that. So our next steps are, and one of them we've actually completed. We went through the city's marketing team. They've actually looked at the concept to make sure it is compatible with the city's, the new marketing ideas. So I think the next step that we're going to do is people and talk about locations and talk about the sign design that we currently have. And do we want to modify it in any way? And how's it going to function? And then start moving the project forward. I told you my update would be brief, and that's it.
One more question. So the current design that we just saw, that came from the sign company?
It is.
Okay, so they based that off of,
The flag, but this would need to be updated with the branding and font that's consistent with City of Columbia's. And we'll have opportunity to have input on this design, correct?
okay, that's what I was, I think
Yeah,
you're right.
yeah, I think
we're in no hurry to have a sign that we don't love.
Yeah, we'd like to see that. And then,
I will say that is the secondary sign. The primary sign, everything's backlit. So it actually has LED backlit lights where the name is. We will actually be able to change colors of those as we want to during the year to celebrate anything we can celebrate. So it has a lot of good design features in it. We wanted it low maintenance, and it is low maintenance. So I think working with maybe some brick colors and stuff like that's what we need to do next.
I would say the good news is I consider myself an expert in this field.
yeah, we definitely have an expert on the signs.
Whether anybody else does or not, it's not relevant to me.
And I think once you have those conversations, I think it would be great if we can divide and conquer these 18 locations by these signs versus the sign shop signs, just updating our very old Columbia, a world-class play to be, or whatever that is. They're all over your district, actually, that need to be taken down, and I think it'll be easier for us to visualize where it would go.
Yeah,
Are these gonna work into the MBGL?
Yes.
This will just be a component of their larger beautification funding?
They will work into some of it. The MBLG signs or the locations are a lot of those are outside the city. Like 302 is the first one, Forest Drive's the second one. I think Highway 1 is the third one over in Lexington. So the MBLG stuff is more regional approached versus this is more local. But some of these signs should be within.
So what is that? So what's the MBGL sign gonna say?
They're not doing a sign, they're doing just landscaping. And I'm sitting on their committee for that, to be a liaison to us for this project, so they're aware of this. But theirs is beautifying the gateways from like the airport and into Fort Jackson, and it's just landscaping, yeah.
good. One other thing I'd recommend on the signage, we should do we can do a prototype review of maybe not even a whole sign, but like parts of a sign.
Yeah.
At Colite. And to be honest with you, that's something that a lot of our industry doesn't like doing because they consider it, extra work. But, we always try to get the stakeholders to come in, and then you can make a lot better decisions when you're actually looking at something in real life than you can on paper.
On paper, yeah.
So we'll make sure we get that. Yep. One what's our timing on this, I mean, realistically?
Yeah, that was my next.
With several other projects we got going on right now. I would like to meet within the next 2 weeks with our group, and then maybe bring the sign company in to start hearing some of our ideas along with the city's marketing firm, so we can start, shaking out some of the little things. I think once we get that done, I mean, the sign, looks pretty good, that I wouldn't think it'd take too long.
So we could aim for like first quarter of 2024.
I was gonna say, I think a 13-week process is a pretty normal process for something like this.
Yeah, I think we've got the stumbling blocks we may have will be the DOT permits, something like that. But we're holding those permits, but we'll work with it.
Yeah, okay, sounds good.
Awesome, thank
All right, any
you.
more questions? Good, all right, thanks. All right, how about zoning? Hey, Krista.
Hello. Good afternoon.
So this is a follow-up to, what, a couple of meetings ago, maybe? Just kind of having Krista give us an update on some of the changes implemented on zoning, and then kind of look at what's the process going forward.
Indeed, yes. So thank you. What we now call the Unified Development Ordinance formerly was the Zoning and Land Development Ordinance. And so we are updating you on that process that we went through. We still consider it recently to rewrite that entire document. First time that we had done so in 40 years. And a lot of the goals were about streamlining, making it easier to use, and implementing the goals of our comprehensive plan, which you know as Plan Columbia, which is a 10-year comprehensive plan. So significant changes, one of the major ones is really just about how you use the document and how easy it is to use compared with the previous one that was very text heavy. There's a lot of tables, there's a lot of flow charts, there's pictures as well to help describe to people what it is we're trying to convey. Not, as I mentioned before, it's still a technical document. It still requires, some discussion, but it is a whole lot easier. In addition, we have a lot more definitions, and they're written in actual English that we and others can use. And there's a section in the beginning, all on administration, so you can look at what it is you're trying to do and know who's involved and what steps are necessary instead of trying to parse that out from the document. So you asked for some highlights of improvements. One of the ones we've found to be extremely beneficial is an administrative adjustment. So previously, if you were a little off of your setback, let's say 6 inches, foot, you would have to go to the Board of Zoning Appeals for that. The ordinance now allows for certain dimensional requirements to receive an administrative adjustment based on certain standards from the zoning administrator, thereby reducing the number of those cases. We now have accessory dwelling units, which under certain standards, you can have an accessory dwelling unit for single-family residences even as well. Property owner needs to be living there. We have a lot more mixed-use districts. We used to have primarily commercial and residential. One of the goals was to increase the mix of uses primarily along our corridors to get multifamily in there. That helps with our housing. It helps take off some of the pressure in our single-family residential districts. We now have green building standards and incentives, and we have neighborhood compatibility standards. And one thing we haven't seen someone use yet, but we'll be talking a little bit about this in a second, is the cottage development type, which allows for kind of compact development. Would be great, I think, for retired folks, for empty nesters, allows you to put all of those around like a central green and put the parking out to the edge. So we're hopeful that we'll see some folks take advantage of that.
Can I ask a quick question before we move forward?
Yes.
Okay, so I love those changes and they all make sense. So are they unified changes across the city, or are there
Yes.
different improvements for different areas?
So for the mixed-use districts, for instance, those are primarily along our corridors. Our corridors used to be zoned mainly just a general commercial or a predominantly commercial. Almost all of our districts corridors are now mixed use. So you'll find that you're allowed to do multifamily residential along many of those corridors. Neighborhood compatibility is throughout the city as well. So
It's gonna be my next question. So is that concept, is that a black and white concept or a gray concept?
So it's contextual. So I guess you could say
Right.
gray. Because why that's important is because there is not a one size fits all. When you are developing commercial right directly adjacent to someone's house, it matters how far away that is from the house with regard to buffers, where you put your driveway. So it really does matter based on the context. So if you had a one size fit all, black and white, it wouldn't work as well.
So, and that's fine. So are there areas of Columbia that this should aid more than other areas? This streamlining of, and I guess simplification?
So the ease of use and what I described in the slide before, that's citywide, that's code-wide, absolutely. That impacts everybody. Some of these others are dependent upon the context in which you're located. So if you're on Divine Street or on North Main Street and your house right behind it, you're going to benefit a little bit more from neighborhood compatibility than if you're a house way deep into the neighborhood. So, or if it's a corridor that's predominantly commercial, like let's say Columbiana Drive. I mean, those aren't going to apply. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to think about is, and when I think about, just a general concept of economic development, I can't help but think about like certain areas of Columbia and our ability to affect the development of those areas in a more strategic way than we've previously done in Columbia. So for instance, I think about Rosewood Drive all the time. And I think about, as a city, and based on these changes, is there some strategic plan that we could kind of provide that allows people to, I'm a developer from Atlanta and I want to develop in Columbia, and I say, well, here's a great strategic plan for Rosewood Drive from Assembly all the way to Beltline. Okay, and without making it weird or too much. Okay, but just giving people, like, if you're a developer of mixed use, or if you're a developer of this, these are the areas in Columbia that would be amazing for you to develop. And it seems like that there's always this disconnect of projects, and I could be making that up because I'm not a developer.
So what zoning does is set the table, and then it doesn't entice the development necessarily. It facilitates and sets the table. And I would say that the zoning districts we have now, for instance, along Rosewood, along with some of the improvements we've seen that followed, for instance, removing the parking requirements, that has set the table. Now, with regard to maybe painting what you're putting out the menu a little bit more, that's going beyond a little bit more of zoning, but you could do that through a planning process. So we did a neighborhood planning process and included Rosewood Drive a little bit with the corridor. But you could potentially, provide more of this is what could be done here.
I guess that's what I'm saying is you kind of lay it out there that if you're, this type, this is what you develop, and it may give us from the city a more of a, concept when people come here to be able to say, oh, wow, you should definitely look at this area, so, but I guess what I'm saying is, I think maybe we can take that the step further.
So you want to put some eyewash to help, like some elevations to show what
what
this
I
could
wanna
be.
do
And
is-
those I think those exist in some form or fashion on the zoning examples, right? They'll show the space program. A 3-story mixed use can go, along this corridor under this zoning. But to tailor it, which I agree with you, I mean, that is pretty much a market type study, a market presentation.
Because I think that the answer is you want people fishing in the right place, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And we want to tell them where we think they should fish when they want to develop in Columbia, whether it's a local person or somebody especially if it's somebody from out of state, and kind of point them in the right direction.
Yeah, and that would be a partnership with economic development to target those areas and state that these are the uses we've set the table for these types of uses and this type of development. This is where you can look to go.
Okay. That's
I
all.
fully support a Rosewood.
I know, I'm telling you, and that was my.
I got an old
that's where-
Family Dollar looking to
I
be something.
know, and I grew up in that area and it's, every time I go by there, it just seems like it's just an amazing stretch of, corridor in Columbia that could just be such transformative for the city and for that whole area.
It is, and we have a number of those. One of our challenges there is that there needs to be land assembly as well.
Right.
We have a lot of individual owners of individual parcels that need to be
Yeah,
consolidated.
but to your point, I also think that once the Assembly Street, kind of that ballpark area, the 10 or so parcels around there, once those start breaking ground, I think you'll see the whole Rosewood market kind of.
It is
become
funny
covered.
that, because I think that way too. It's like you almost need to have a stake in the ground here and then one here, and then let those two stakes connect each other, organically, but then also try to drive people to help develop that area the way it makes the most sense. So I think without the stake in the ground, like you said, where the ballpark is, and then the stake in the ground, kind of where Frank's developing, or even further down, you could help that whole area just kind of mesh into, I think it could be an amazing.
So it sounds like this could be an opportunity then to maybe merge some of the different efforts that are happening in terms of our marketing study and some of the work there to make and build collateral to court different businesses with some of these, I think, potential opportunities through our new zoning changes. So it's really finding a way to communicate about this in a way that, like you said, it makes people look in the right place.
Right.
Because right now, unless you know that our plan is called Columbia Compass and you understand zoning, you do have to do a little bit of research to understand where you could build.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
And what you do there.
Yeah, and what you can build.
I just wanted to ask a question on the accessory dwelling units. Have you seen more permits come through for that since we adopted or made that change to promote, 2 years ago?
Right. I don't have the number with me right now. I do understand we have seen some. So there are conditions. We didn't open the doors wide open, which some communities have, and we may want to consider. But you do have to have, the owner has to live in one or the other of the residences. So, but I can certainly get that information. for you.
How does the accessory dwelling unit work in historically protected neighborhoods or community character neighborhoods?
It's still permitted.
Does it have to match the unit in front of it? What are the details there?
Gotcha, yes. So if it is in a design review district, a historic district, it still has to be reviewed according to the design guidelines.
Okay, but it can be built.
Yes. Yes, it
Okay,
can.
fantastic.
So one of the other things is from our comprehensive plan and that was implemented in this streamlining is promoting infill, because largely, we're a built-out community and we're going to get infill development. That's where most of our expansion is going to come. And so as you all know, we implemented parking reform, which removed minimum parking requirements for most of our mixed-use districts. We also increased the lot coverage allowance, so you can build more on the lot in most of our zoning districts. Multifamily, as I already mentioned, is permitted. More flexibility for light and clean manufacturing. I want to see more of that. And we increased the threshold for review that has to go to Planning Commission, so streamlining that review as well. This is the graph. So we were trying to get cases out of the Board of Zoning Appeals, and as you can see, over the years, we've halved it at least, if not more.
That's awesome. Can I go back real quick to the previous slide?
Absolutely.
Okay, so the 7,500 square foot, was that an arbitrary number or was that a sophisticated number?
That was one that the council asked for that we used in the 5 Points area. So it began, that was our pilot, was to use that in that district. And I believe that was because most of the businesses were in structures of that size. So the 7,500 square feet, that number applies to outside of our mixed-use districts. So in your general commercial or your industrial. In the other mixed-use districts, there is no parking requirement. So that 7,500 foot or lower is only for like the other districts. That's gotten confused as we've implemented this. So I just want to make sure that that's clear.
Do we feel like that's the right number? Or should it be?
I think it's a good place to start, but
I would love to get some feedback from the commercial real estate.
Well, I think that specific minimum part, so that a lot of input was given by commercial and business. And we got some pushback from some, neighborhood folks
Yeah.
as well. So I agree. I think in the future, when we see more density come in, it could be changed. But it has allowed for things like, for example, Gus's,
Right.
some of those things wouldn't happen anymore because of this and not having to require him to get additional parking.
Well, that's what I was wondering, if we feel like we're at a good place, or do we feel like we need to look at tweaking that?
So right now, I would characterize that a majority of our corridors fall under the no parking requirement. Almost our entire city center has no parking requirement.
Okay.
So the 7,500 is really applying to a small subset of commercial development that is more auto-oriented anyway. So we're talking Garner's Ferry Road, some of our Shop Road, those areas that, quite frankly, they're going to build the parking regardless of whether you're required or not.
Yeah, I don't think I'd want to park on Garner's Ferry Road.
So it's good. I mean, it encourages,
Yeah.
all of the empty lots hopefully to get filled through this and not have to worry about the additional.
And I think
parking.
that's one of the things, going back to Will's point, as we kind of market Columbia or market areas, I think this is good for us to make sure people know about this stuff. Because I do think there's a lot of, you even brought up misunderstanding of stuff. There's also a lot of non-understanding of stuff. And I think if we kind of, I want to sell these areas. I want to sell them hard, and I want to attract people to, and it could be, at the end of the day, it might be a ground game where we're really strategically trying to develop a certain, parcel in Columbia that we think is important. We want to find somebody to do it. Okay, thanks.
So finally, what's next? When last we spoke, we did hear that we had brokers who were displaying the incorrect zoning, for instance, on their listings. That was largely because Richland County was displaying the wrong zoning on their GIS, have for years. And thank goodness, with the help of our GIS folks, we have that corrected now. So I've been checking in just today. It came up. You go to Richland County GIS, and it actually displays the correct City of Columbia zoning. So that's really huge, because now you won't have that confusion. It was working to correct, but now it is corrected. So
Does it send you to the Columbia City GIS, or it just populates their template?
It populates theirs. So I would love it if it were
I
to
was
send
just
them
gonna say, that goes back to what we're saying.
us. But baby steps, we've at least got the correct information. We would love for it to shoot over to our GIS, because I think our GIS is fantastic. But right now, at least we have correct information on that website. So we're continuing the streamlining by rewriting design guidelines. We're starting with the two districts downtown, the Innovista and the city center. So we'll be coming to you, kicking that off soon. I believe some of you know about collaborating with partners on assessing impediments to what's called the missing middle housing, and that is that kind of medium density that used to be all over our towns. You see it predominantly in our first ring suburbs, quads, eights, seeing what we have that may not be facilitating that. We're continuing to make adjustments. At your next council meeting, you'll see another amendment that we're processing for a zoning district. And then finally, trying to get the information out in a more collaborative way. We are holding our development clinics that will be providing a forum for education and interaction with our professionals with which we work.
Go ahead.
So can you give us a quick summary of that change, the employment campus amendment?
Certainly. So there are certain uses. It falls under the industrial category, and there's a lot of zoning uses that are not permitted. So for instance, we had, Councilman Duval had someone who was wanting to sell golf carts. It was not permitted. We have medium manufacturing, it's not permitted. So there's a number of uses that we are recommending for your consideration to be allowed in the
Be
EC.
allowed.
Yes.
So where's the residential component in that as well? Because it's very limited.
It is. So I know we did add live work. I don't have, I can certainly send it to you.
We're not opening the floodgates for multifamily and employment campus. It's still that niche live work, right?
It is. Yeah. So we did add live work
Okay.
and to the residential, but I'll check and I'm certainly happy to send it to you in advance.
Yeah, I trust it.
One more question. So I hear a lot about overlays in Columbia. So how is all this addressed, the number of overlays that we have?
So the overlays, the two of which that I just mentioned, those are design guidelines. So what our overlays do, generally speaking, is implement a set of design guidelines. Largely, we have historic preservation districts. That I believe we have 18, and then we have urban design districts. And to implement those guidelines, that's what's called an overlay. So we are looking at those first two to revise those design guidelines to make them easier to use. As I think I've mentioned to you before, the first one dates from 1998, and we struggle with it. So we want to make those easier. It's going to be a focus instead necessarily on the architecture as the experience of the public realm. Like, what is it when you're walking down the street? You know, what do you experience? How do we impact the pedestrian friendliness of our environment, the right-of-way improvements, those types of things. And those are a lot easier to articulate than architecture.
I think that ties into exactly what we were talking about earlier, though, which is this comprehensive look at what works where in Columbia and how to promote that to people who are going to want to develop in Columbia, and kind of just spotlight these. If you want to do this, this is the type of area that would really work best.
Are the guidelines in overlay districts just recommendations?
So they do have a force of law, but because it's not ordinance, you can meet them in multiple ways based on the context and what's around it. So that's why we have, and this dates back to the first boards of architectural review back, I think Charleston was one of the first ones. And so you have your set of design principles, but you have a variety of ways that you can meet that.
Right, so with the focus on, smart growth, density, and height. So, is that something that's going to be considered when we look at the new overlays is, height requirements, stuff like that?
No, we are steering way clear of height. That is regulated in zoning. So we will take that out of any reference in our design guidelines and let that be strictly regulated in zoning. So there is no confusion because
So
there
the
has been.
overlay, the developer looks at the overlay, sees that, it says for X, Y, and Z, go look at the zoning, essentially, for the major, for height.
Right, for any lot coverage, any of those things. What this would be talking about are those items that are not in the zoning district. For instance, do you have windows on the first floor? Is it a blank wall? Or where are your openings?
Landscape requirements, stuff. Where's that, the zoning, or is that?
That's also in the land development code, yeah. So we do have that landscaping. You have some overlay, for instance, if you have a parking lot that's near a sidewalk, which is not your best case scenario, but where you want to have that screened, potentially with some landscaping. But it really is about those items that are more nuanced, that are not in the zoning ordinance.
So you would consider overlay would be a restriction on zoning?
It's an extra layer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fine.
It's a
I'll go-
restriction
I'll
on
go with-
design.
Yeah, I'll go along with that. So it's an extra layer. So let's go back to Rosewood real quick.
Mhm.
So what overlays, if any, exist on Rosewood Drive?
There are not any overlays on
They're
Rosewood.
typically like Vista, 5 Points.
Yeah, so we've got our urban design overlays are downtown, as Dr. Bustles are in a Vista and City Center, which we're going to work on first. We have one on North Main, and then we have one in 5 Points.
That's the only ones we have.
Beyond that, we have historic districts, which is Gervais Street. That's the historic commercial district that we have. And then we have multitudes of residential districts, Earlwood.
But the
Old
overlays are also on top of the historic districts in those 4 areas, correct? So it's like a third level for
Right.
that
Right.
in terms of.
So yeah, you do have a overlay for urban design and an
The
overlay.
chicken is zoning, and then the eggs are the design guidelines and,
Correct. Yeah, it provides that higher level of review beyond just, what's your box? It's like, what's your box going to look like?
more questions? Thanks, Krista. So what I would ask going forward is, as you dig into the city center and Inna Vista, would love to have periodic updates to really discuss the process and how we are looking at making these changes going forward, I guess. And then what do we think they're gonna actually, accomplish for us?
I'd love to do that. That's
Yeah,
great. Thank
great.
you.
All right, thanks. All right, so we're gonna go back to the top, and I'm gonna introduce our guest, Frank Kaysen, who's president of Kaysen Development. I think most of you probably know Frank. Frank's a longtime Columbia resident. Definitely a welcome addition to the development world in Columbia. And so he's here just to give you, we'll let you, he's brought some handouts, and then, but we also are gonna just let him kind of talk, and we're gonna make this extremely interactive and just kind of talk about, it's good to update everybody on what they do, and then, but also, look at the same thing, kind of what we just talked about, what are the challenges, and, what are the things about Columbia that, are good, and what are the challenges that we still see, and, Frank, thanks for coming, appreciate it, it was kind of short notice, so, thanks for being here.
Absolutely, yeah. I was told to put a PowerPoint together yesterday, so
But you did it.
forgive the informality of this. And I feel like I know most people in here, but I'm Frank Kaysen with Kaysen Development Group. We primarily, what we do, about half of what we do is here in the city of Columbia, about half of what we do is around the state. So the half that you don't see is primarily retail driven. So we've worked in most markets around the state, and but most of what we do outside of the city is what we kind of call merchant build, where we build and sell. And so we're very familiar with that type of development. We got plenty of that here too. Almost everything we do here in Columbia is with no intent to sell. So we are here in Columbia, have been here for a while, and plan to be here for a while.
You'd say your crowning achievement is the Taco Bell in Batesburg-Leesville.
Thank you for bringing that up. Yes, it's page 1, if you will. Yes. Thank you for knowing about that one, Will.
It's a good one, it's clean.
So we have done a lot of historic rehab work here, and are very proud of that as well. Not every project not every building can be saved. Not every building needs to be saved. But we think there are a lot of times when they can and should be. So Peter didn't give me a lot of direction on where he wanted me to go, but
Freedom.
Okay, free. Perfect, which is a great place to start. I was with another developer in Greenville last week who said, he actually said, this is a huge positive in my mind. He said, it feels like Columbia is headed to where Greenville was, and Greenville is headed to where Columbia was in terms of government, meaning, and he said Greenville feels like, they feel like the government was responsible for their development now, when the reality was that the government got out of the way and let them do what they do. I love what Krista just said. It's probably can't be focused on enough. She said those 7,500 square foot users on Garner's Ferry are gonna build parking, whether you put an opening for them to not build parking or not. They want it. They need it. It's financially, for them, their model is not going to work. But there are projects downtown that don't need the same amount of parking. there are reasons why we live downtown. And I think the more we strengthen this core and kind of change the culture here on parking, because it's literally every project we ever have, every time somebody argues that we don't have enough parking or that it's going to generate more traffic. And as much as you say, have you ever been to Greenville or Charleston? It's still a constant thing. So I brought this packet really just to kind of use as a flip through, not as promotion for any of our projects, more to say we could walk through some of these to just kind of talk through one or two little problems and issues.
Yeah, I would rather just flip through them. I've always been interested in how your development in Cottontown came about.
Yeah. And it's actually the ordinance that Krista was just on, the no parking thing. Would have been really great about 8 years ago, because we did 9 buildings down there, and every single one went to BOZA. Everyone had 1, 2, and maybe some of them may have been 3 BOZA or special exceptions or variances. So some of them had a special exception and a variance. And we were admittedly very fortunate that we had a forward-thinking BOZA at the time. And so we got a lot of pushback. And we do the very best we can, and we're really big on trying to talk to the neighbors as early as possible and as much as possible. I don't know if it's ever enough, and we've made plenty of mistakes and mishaps in that. But we try to do what we can to talk to them. Most of the time, we found they just want to be heard. They just want people to kind of talk to them. So we did that a lot in Cottontown and built up a rapport with them where we could at least talk through issues. That didn't mean the board of Cottontown supported us on every project, but we definitely were able to talk through, all right, well, what if we did this? And what if we added this to that project? That was the first project that we did, Peter. So, and then we really just took each one piecemeal. So we bought a few of the buildings at the same time because they were just kind of in the same parcel, but we really took it piecemeal. We saw that, and I'd say see that still as sort of a microcosm for what we feel like we can do in Columbia, which is start somewhere, make an impact, make a big impact in a small area, and do it through, I hate to sound cheesy, but through curating the tenants that we put in there. We've been very intentional about the tenant mix that we put down there. We started with the Warmouth. That brought lunchtime and nighttime traffic. We knew that there was a huge void in the morning. And I mean, admittedly, as the Lord would have it, a coffee user came to us and we were like, this is perfect. Now there'll be some morning traffic.
I actually think that's super important for Columbia going forward. And that, again, goes full circle to what we're talking about, which is trying to take out some of the randomness of development and be more strategic. And I mean, and I look at this and you can tell you were strategic because it's like, well, this makes so much sense, as a development.
Yeah.
Versus, we'll take whoever shows up and throw them into a lease.
Yeah. Well, most people didn't think it made sense when we were doing it, but it feels good now. I mean, the next big piece, we've got to have that Cadillac dealership developed, and hopefully that's happening. But so, although we're upset we're not doing it, we're glad somebody's doing it. It's good that somebody's doing it, and I think it's a good developer. So we're huge proponents of other developers. Like, people ask us a lot, who you compete with. We're like, we don't compete with anybody. I mean, we may have offers coming in at the same time, but yeah, exactly. So
if we flip the page,
Yeah,
I was going to ask you. So, what's your current take on 5 Points?
we love 5 Points. I wish there were more sellers down there, to be honest. I think that's another microcosm of Columbia. There are so many landlords that for so long are not willing to invest $1 in their real estate, and it makes a huge difference because what are they going to do? They're going to take whatever comes, and a lot of these landlords have owned them forever or they've been passed down. And so what happens is they don't reinvest. And if they're not willing to reinvest, they can't up the rents. And if they can't up the rents,
Right.
then There's
spiral.
going to be bar after bar after bar. And so, like perfect example is the next corner, Ruby Sunshine, whatever that place is going next to.
Former
Yeah.
yesterday's, yeah.
They're getting higher rent, probably by a factor of 2 or 3 times what anybody else has gotten down there. And it's because they invested. They actually took the risk and started investing before they got that tenant, but it's because they're willing to invest dollars in that space on one of the 5 points, one of the most iconic corners. So,
So do you think there's I get the long-term owners that
Yep.
are not sellers. Is there a secondary problem math when it comes to, because I'm happy to hear about
Yeah.
that. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but the problem is you cannot transform anything in the free world with lower rent.
yeah,
Okay, so that's just not.
yeah, that is very true.
So what I'm saying is there a secondary issue based on the math of renovating the building, putting a tenant in there, and then their ability to make money?
Yeah. Ultimately, all of it comes back to demand, right? Which leads to infill development. The more apartments and people we have living downtown, the more the restaurants can do. We don't have very many restaurateurs. That's a fact. We really don't. So our biggest struggle trying to bring in other restaurateurs is, we don't have the demand sort of height that Charleston does. We don't have the supply. That's what we try to argue. I think that's true. And it's been evidenced by Halls and Home Team as 2 perfect examples of that. But yeah, it does come down to economics. And I'm not a politician, but the taxes, they hammer us. They thankfully, in retail, it gets passed through to tenants. So it's often not as impactful. It's hugely impactful with apartments. It's probably it's the reason why we haven't seen
You hear that, Jeff?
much development. Yeah. I was on a panel like maybe 9 months ago, and there were 3 of us, and it was me and one of the Prioreshi's, Jeff, and David Tuttle. And someone, I hadn't thought about this, someone made the point that every development so between the 3 of us, I guess, and Ben Arnold, I think that's the only market rate apartment developers or housing that has been built between the 4 of us. And every single one, I guess except for Ben's, he's in a different spot, but had to be incentivized. All of them are historic tax credits incentivized. So we recently bought, I'm jumping off of 5 points, I know I'll come back to it, but we recently bought the property at Taylor Street where the Busted Plug was.
Yeah.
That the city relocated, not us, right? And we desperately want to build apartments there. We can't do them. We can't build them right now. And yeah, we can talk about economic conditions and the cost
Why?
of construction, and
It's because of the wrong
the numbers
conditions.
don't work. Yeah.
I'm excited
Right
about
now,
this.
today. Yeah, that's right. So that's right next to that, and which
Yeah.
we were gonna. The reason we've slowed down on it is because she's talking about 1525 Bull, that 3-story.
I feel like that
brick
street and
building.
Elmwood are 2 streets that really could benefit from just cabling underground and, starting to see some development and
Very
updated
true.
sidewalks. Because they are, especially with the Bull Street corridor, gonna hopefully be attracting folks from 277 and from I-26. There's a real opportunity
I
there.
think that's one of 3 hottest intersections in Columbia. And
It doesn't look great right now,
No,
though.
it's terrible.
It looks
That's
pretty
what makes it-
terrible
that's
when
what
you
makes it
come in
hot.
and you're just like,
Yeah.
ugh,
Terrible.
yeah.
The problem is going back to the math, and to be honest with you, the reason I was kind of picking on Jeff is that, I'm really trying to dig into the math on Texas. It is super, 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 super convoluted, confusing, and maybe just flat out impossible to completely understand from a math perspective. My goal, you ever seen those commercials where some professor's up there and he's got this whole huge board and he's doing all these math equations? Reminds me of all the C's I got at Notre Dame. I didn't understand any of it then, and it's just hard to understand all this now. So it's like there's got to be some super complicated math equation, but it's just hard to understand and unless we really understand the math behind the city and the county and how all this goes from X to Y, it's gonna be difficult to
Yeah.
make these changes.
Yeah.
So what, if you wanted to develop that area, it's strictly the tax math or is it, or is it
5 points.
other? No,
Or
we're going back to
anywhere.
we're
The
going to
Taylor Street.
Oddities
Yeah.
intersection at Sumter and Taylor. Or is it, Bull and Taylor,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, is
Yeah.
the,
So
the
is that-
math is that you don't have the population here yet? Or
So we don't have we don't have the rent numbers to get the rent number that we need to make the deal work, right? So yes, taxes are part of it. Now that particular deal, I believe we qualify for the the tax incentive program. So that helped a ton, and that made it close. But our rent numbers aren't quite.
So I'll
there
tell
yet,
you,
so.
you should talk to Ben Arnold about the math behind the Palms.
He is getting, yeah.
And,
We have seen his
and I think it's a good story
Yeah.
that you should just have that conversation with him. You know, it's really, I would say that I think you could probably get the rent maybe that you needed. The question is it sustainable as more and more people come into the market? So I would argue that the rent might be there now, but it might not be there long-term, and you're a long-term.
Yeah, I mean, to me, Peter, that's where we feel like we do have an advantage because we can look long-term, not 5 years, but 20 years to
Then
say.
it'll probably, it probably
Yeah,
probably got a
Yeah.
few dips in. But I mean, we see the need in Columbia for, a huge need
yeah,
for multifamily, huge. I mean,
Huge.
and I'm just telling you, I don't even know if I have a number in my brain that tells me where Columbia should stop.
yeah,
Okay, I don't think that number exists
Yeah.
of where we have too many units. And you should also talk, you probably already have, I know, you should talk to Robert Hughes as well.
Yeah.
I'm sure you already have.
yes, for sure. Yeah, we're working with them on something else too. I mean, we have 30 units right here that are not far off price-wise from Ben, and then we have 50 units on Rosewood, and they're both 100% occupied with waiting lists.
Right.
Then this morning I got an email from our property manager saying, here's our projected increases next year, rental increases next year. So,
When I was in the billboard business, we used to say that we're in the apartment business without the problems.
yeah, there's plenty of.
So it's the same thing, but it's all
Yeah.
based on supply and demand.
Yeah, that's what's weird is that the demand's there. The supply, the lack of supply is going to hold Columbia back. If we can't get more apartments built, then there's not going to be more restaurants. There's not going to be more retail.
I was gonna say, so what do you think the chicken is in all this?
It's residential. People,
I think you're right.
the amount of people that come to us, and then we have a mindset thing in Columbia too. People who say, "Gosh, can we build any more apartments here?" I'm like, "You guys got to drive through Greenville and Charleston." Like,
No, I have people that,
thousands on thousands of
no,
apartments.
I have young, parents of young people, and they say, my son or daughter's moving to Columbia, and they say, where should they live? And you know what I tell them? I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't have any idea. I mean, seriously, I have no idea.
Yeah.
I don't have any idea what to tell you to do.
yeah. That's a problem ultimately. I think making our city.
Personally.
This is going to sound cheesy, but I think making our city cool is a huge part of what attracts people here. Well, what makes cities cool? It's not office buildings. It's retail and restaurants. That's what attracts people to Charleston, and that's what Greenville's done a great job.
Speaking
Parks
of
as well.
retail and restaurants.
Yep.
Well, back to 5 points. I know your intentionality
Let's
when
come
you
back.
go towards your
Yeah,
building.
let's go back to 5 points.
You
Good.
have some wonderful buildings in 5 Points. Techno, obviously you have a tenant in the Men's Warehouse.
Yep. We
What's the
don't.
timeline on thinking about, that conversion
Yeah.
from I guess retail to the restaurant? For
Men's
let's take
Warehouse, unfortunately,
Techno, for example.
has a I'll hit Men's Warehouse first, since that's the unfortunate one. They have a lease.
Right.
We have desperately tried to get them out because we don't really want them in there. But I mean, they're paying their rent, and but we do not want them in there. That's not the fit for where it is for sure. We have a number of restaurants that are like ready to go in as soon as they move out, but they've got a while. And then we have the barbershop and the sushi, the old Sushi Yoshi place too. So we've got a great user we're working with right now on that space, which is a restaurant user that we're very excited about. And then we do have a full building restaurant user, local. There's actually 2 local restaurateurs coming together. I have not seen this happen in 20 years I've been in commercial real estate, where 2 local restaurateurs have come together on a project. And it's a pretty cool, I'll just say they've used images from 5 of Charleston's best restaurants as their representative images, vision for the space. So it could be very exciting.
Feel good about it? Is it going to happen?
What's that?
Is it going to happen?
I think so. We're really, really close. And again, only way that project happens is with historic tax credits, because it's very expensive.
I think that's part of that was when I was
Yeah.
specifically alluding to that when I talked about the math.
Yeah.
So the problem with the math with 5 points, and I also think that, if I was 20 years younger, I'd be trying to buy up the entire 5 points.
Yeah.
Because I think it's the hottest potential of any place
Me
in
too.
Columbia, especially with the university continuing to grow. And I think they'll help us connect some dots as well over time.
Yeah.
But there is I don't know if it's a 5-year or 10-year problem of how it develops.
Yeah.
So, I mean, do you think is there a secret to, or is this just going to be a slugfest? And
I think,
5 points.
yeah, I think the right landlords and developers, which we are one of them, just to be clear, is they're going to pick the right tenants. They're going to raise they're going to invest dollars, and when they invest dollars, they have to raise rents. And when they raise rents, that's a good thing because there are only certain tenants that can afford it. Now, like the Sushi Yoshi space, which is this small space, we really want a local user there. We're not shying away from a national user, but the reality is 1,000 square foot tenant. There are not very many national users there. So because of historic tax credits, because of Bailey Bill, we can do and get a little more creative on that. And I think it all works on top of itself and builds on it itself. So the more solid local restaurants we have, the more they show the market that there's demand there, and the more apartments we have, et cetera, and it just starts to build on itself. So there are not a lot of opportunities to do add apartment density, residential density in the 5 Points area.
That's a good question. So Krista, so in 5 Points, what's the zoning / everything else associated with multifamily in 5 Points?
And I'm even initially speaking like feasibility of there's not a big enough site to.
There's some outlier sites that
There are a
are
few, yeah.
that are big enough.
I'll speak over So I believe it's our community activity center. I'll have to, but that allows for multifamily.
Okay, good.
75 feet, I think, right?
I think that does go to an issue that we see a lot for economic development that stops and halts economic development. I hate to say this harshly, but is we feel at least a lack of leadership when the neighborhoods uprise, and not if, when there's an uprising. I drove down Gervais to get here, and I drove past a site that actually went 10 years ago, maybe 12 years ago. So when I was at Collier, I was a broker at Collier's. A student housing developer had the site where that car wash is going right now under contract. At the time, they couldn't build four bedroom units, and their taxes were twice what they were in any other city. And so they dropped the project. 12 years later, we got a car wash. The next site that I passed was a student housing development that was planned. I don't think we need a lot more student housing, don't get me wrong, but the market dynamics also lead. Should lead, in my opinion. And we got, instead of a $50 million apartment project, we got a parking lot. And it's a really expensive parking lot, but we got a parking lot. And the next development I passed, and they're friends of mine, but we got a Midas, and it's a really nice Midas. But those are three really critical development sites and opportunities. I mean, one of which maybe the parking lot is still an opportunity at some point, but now the university owns it
I
too.
don't know.
So
I'm still mad about that one.
that's a travesty to me. I mean, that's a big miss, and I do think that's leadership. And I think those are
So you're
losses
going-
for Columbia.
Now you're taking us back one more time, full circle to the previous discussion about how I'm not kidding. I mean, we have to, I mean, and I'm mentally prepared to almost be strategic, parcel by parcel by parcel by parcel by parcel, with us and the right developer and the right fit for that property and the right push to get it done. I mean, we're really almost in that situation that, and again, if you let random drive things, you know what you get? Random. I mean, if you're strategic, you get strategic. So I mean, we really,
Low-hanging fruit,
and that's
yeah.
what I'm saying. I think we have to, and that's why I really want to understand this to a really baseline level so that we can work with, to bring people to, and then make it as easy as possible for them. But there's no question, at some point, we have to address the concept of our taxes. I mean, we can make this progress, but we're not going to make this progress without addressing the fact that our taxes just aren't competitive with other places. And in today's world, you know, I mean, I'm a good example in we almost never do signs in Columbia. Okay, we're a global company. It's not because we don't want to do signs here. It's just that we just don't. And that we live in a global world. If I can live in a global world, that means almost every developer can too. And when he does his math and says, well, I could go here for X or I could go here for half X, what's he going to do?
Yeah.
I mean,
Every
it's just,
time,
I mean, it's just the way it is. And
Frank,
we
do you
just
have
have
an
to get that
example
through our heads.
of a development that you've tried to do where you think, now you specifically,
Yeah,
this
yeah.
case in development,
Yeah.
where you think leadership has stopped you?
That's a good question.
Or you can use one word, do you think leadership has helped you?
Yeah. I don't think you were teeing this up, but I'm gonna say it anyways. Our Rosewood project was a challenge for sure, and you were a huge help. Seth Rose was a huge help in getting the street shut down. I want to say Councilman, and there was a lot of wasn't he? Didn't he get involved too? He was involved too. And there was a lot of pushback, and it did take a lot of. I mean, I think that is a good example of where, when leadership steps in and says, "Can I understand what's going on?" and try to walk through with the developer. Now, these developers don't have forever because they're most of the time under contract and they're trying to work with this seller who's trying to sell. But if you can get through that process expeditiously and try to have some sort of coordination between.
But I also think
Which
the
is always-
Rosewood adaptive reuse project, like, you as a developer could have gone a complete different direction than saving the buildings,
Yeah.
reusing the gym, kind of vertical with new construction. I mean, I think you said it yourself. You could have put a Dollar General there.
Yeah, 3.
You wouldn't have to have gone
There
through
was
any land use
Yeah,
forms or anything.
that's right. Yeah, we had room to do Dollar General, an AutoZone, and a
Yeah.
freestanding Starbucks.
Yeah.
Actually, that was probably the biggest challenge. Starbucks wants to be freestanding all the time, every time. We got some traffic issues with Starbucks right now, but they want to be freestanding all the time, and we said we're not doing that.
Is that because they want to drive through?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
they
their
want to
new
drive through in
model.
the mornings.
Yeah.
They have one there, but they want it easy. They want it just them, and we said we're not doing that. We're going to add density on this site, and there were some people who said you ought to tear all this down and do 200 units. We probably should have, but
With your
we could have,
parking
yeah.
approach,
Yeah,
I mean, have you noticed that it truly worked out like you planned? So there's morning traffic.
Yeah,
Well,
there is this
you have the
morning.
residents who leave in the morning, the Starbucks in the morning, and then as the new restaurant comes on board and the residents come back.
that has absolutely been the idea and the goal, and we think we've got some issues with Starbucks specifically that we're trying to work. But generally speaking, yeah, it's worked because apartment dwellers leave and they're not there during the day, and Starbucks.
And I think that's
is
your
one,
point.
and Denny's
That's the
are-
thoughtful kind of development for
I know,
mixed use.
I get it.
the
I-
balance.
Before you even said anything, I'd already moved ahead and wrote awesome at the bottom of this slide, because that is an awesome project.
Those were neighborhood Zoom meetings when we didn't know how to.
Oh
work
my
Zoom.
gosh, yeah, yeah. At 2-hour-long meetings, yeah.
Good times.
Yeah.
I will say, can I also say, in, I think the past 9 months or so, this can't be understated enough too, like the mentality for the last 10 years when you brought a project was no, here are all the things you can't do. And the last 9 months, Krista and team, Greg, who just left, is dramatically different. I mean, it's let's talk about the project and see the ways to figure it out. And that's a huge deal when you come to. We're here, so like it's a little different for us. But like, if somebody new comes into town and hears that versus negative, stone face, we're not really interested in your project. We're going to tell you all the reasons why it's going to be difficult. Well, that's pretty deflating when you're trying to invest money and time and energy and risk, because ultimately, it's always an economic and a risk equation that allows anything to get built. So
So I'd love to, I
Yep.
want to throw out, like, since you, to tie into that, I want to take 1436 Taylor Street, and I'd like to make that the challenge of everybody in this room to figure out how to develop that. How to work with you. I'm not kidding, just,
Plus the plus.
yeah. It's fantastic. It looks fantastic right now.
It's just one big
Put that
parking
on,
lot.
put that on the website, everybody. So.
yeah.
Yeah, so what I'm
killing
saying
us.
is, I
It's
think,
killing us, yeah.
I think part of this is we have to understand the challenges of developing this. This, I'm just telling you, this would never be a challenge in any other city in the United States of America.
Out of our size.
And the
yeah.
fact that it's a challenge in Columbia, we have to address it, and we have to work through the fact that this parking lot is a challenge to develop. That's insane. Okay, I mean, somewhere in, maybe Iran, or North Korea, this would be a challenge, but in the United States, this should not be a challenge.
Yeah.
Okay, and we gotta work together to try to figure out what we can do to make this project successful. I think challenge ourselves to really just look at the data and the details and what Frank wants to do, and look at what the math has to be in order to do it. That's what I think you gotta be able to tell you. You gotta tell yourself that that's insane, that can't be developed here.
I'll add to that. One of the things we're excited about there, it's also sort of something you see in other cities is developers working with other developers. And we don't see that a lot here. We partnered with Cone Development, Cone Construction over here. And this project, we've partnered with Cone and Baker & Baker, who y'all are all very familiar with. And so, I mean, it's not a lack of desire or interest in Columbia or firepower, but it is, or demand. I mean, the demand, we all know it's there. So, and we've
It's
got
2 blocks
we've got
from
a
Main
great
Street.
design, yeah.
It drives me crazy. It's 2 blocks from Main Street.
Yeah. Yeah.
It feels like it's further than that, but it's 2 blocks.
Yep.
So,
It
I
would
think
feel,
this is
it would feel
super-
closer to that than that once it was built.
oh my God, no, you're right. It would be, yes, correct. It would shorten that mental distance
Yeah,
a lot.
yeah.
It's a mental distance. It's not a physical
totally.
distance.
Yeah. I agree.
Okay,
Other
any more questions?
questions?
No, thank you. This is
Yeah.
very
Thank y'all.
interesting.
Thank y'all for focusing on this.
Thanks, Frank, appreciate it.
Thank y'all for
That's the
focusing.
best 24-hour PowerPoint I've ever seen in my whole life. Thank you. All right, Will, you want to drive us into executive
Absolutely.
session?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to enter executive session for discussion of matters relating to the proposed location, expansion, and provision of services, encouraging location or expansion of industries or other businesses in the area served by the public body pursuant to SC Code 30-4-785, 2221 Divine Street and Project Growth.
Second.
Thank you. All right, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All right, let's go.